This is the case of a young 14-year-old teenager. She was travelling alone on her bicycle to a music lesson. A young girl that was pushed off her bike, raped and murdered. But a man back in 1981 was able to evade police due to the fact he had no criminal history and DNA advances were a thing of the future. But he was unable to hide forever. This is the story of Marion Crofts. Marion was the youngest of 3 daughters, born to her father Trevor and mother Anne Crofts on Saturday the 6th of June 1981. Her father Trevor was a psychotherapist and her mother a homemaker.
I think maybe she was a bit the apple of his eye, being the baby. She was a good pupil at school, wasn't particularly naughty. She was musical, of course. She was quite a serious child. At 14, she decided she was going to be a teacher. I think she'd probably have done it.
Marion lived with her family at their home in Basingbourne Close in Fleet, Hampshire. The day this crime began, 14-year-old Marion had a clarinet lesson at her school in Farnborough. Ordinarily, her father usually drove her there, but on this occasion, he was playing in a cricket match. So, not wanting to miss it, she jumped on her bicycle and started to cycle there herself. It was a 4-mile ride to the school, but riding her bike, she knew she would be there in no time. Marion's route took her along Laffans Road in Aldershot and alongside the Basingstoke Canal. But Marion would never make it to her lesson as she pedalled along the country path between 9:30 and 10 a.m. Marion was viciously attacked and beaten into unconsciousness. As she lay on the ground bleeding, the killer then raped her, leaving her with severe bruising and a bleed on the brain. The man, who had seemingly come from nowhere, had decided to then hide her body from sight, as although there was no one walking by at that particular moment, it was frequented by dog walkers and strollers. The man began dragging her body into a wooded area by the side of the road. Then, back at home, Marion's parents started to worry when she never made it home. Her parents had seemingly used every avenue they could think of, calling the school, going out searching for her and calling her friends. But they soon established that Marion had never even made it to school in the first place.
I certainly didn't think of what it was. It didn't run through my mind of what had happened. I just thought perhaps there'd been an accident.
It's Marion's. It's her sponsorship form. Mum! Mum! Oh my God. Marion! 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 Wait! Let's get the police.
There was no way I'd let her go up there, or myself, because I was afraid of what we might find.
Now frantic and still with no signs of Marion, her family called the police. Police took as much information from the parents as they could, trying to work out which route she had taken to actually get there, while there was officers on the ground trying to retrace Marion's steps through the streets, country roads and trails. But then, a police dog handler walking through the area in Marion's route was alerted to a particular area by his dog. Marion's body had been hidden in the undergrowth and long grass. Scenes of crime quickly cordoned off the area. There had been a 1-inch groove in the ground beneath Marion's head. This was determined to be from where the man had stamped on her skull, leaving the indentation in the ground below. It was unusual as the ground was hard at that time. This hole he made from Marion's head using his shoe showed the amount of strength and violence he used to inflict by stamping on her head. The clarinet case that she'd been carrying had been thrown into the nearby Basingstoke Canal, where officers later retrieved it. Now we have to remember that this crime occurred in 1981. Officers did not know what they do today and how significant DNA is in terms of a conviction, but they did hope that if they recovered everything that they possibly could into evidence, then one day hopefully someone would be convicted for this attack. The man did not realise this at the time, but he had left traces of his DNA in and on her body, as well as on her jeans and on her left sock. The forensic team recovered everything from soil samples to fingernail scrapings, but despite all their efforts, they were no closer to discovering who had inflicted such a terrible attack on a young girl. In the meantime, the DNA samples from her body and clothing were carefully sealed to avoid cross-contamination, all documented in detail, tagged and stored. As the detective left Marion's parents' house, he could see the sheer terror on their faces as he had to tell them that Marion had been found, but she would never be coming home. The family were in complete shock. Her father felt terrible he had not been there to drive her.
If only I hadn't gone and played cricket. But you have to live with that every day.
The detectives knew that they had to try and use every avenue open to them, so the case was reconstructed at Laffans Road on the BBC One's Crime Watch, aired on the 22nd of February 2000.
It could be a long one, and I'm still optimistic that it won't be a long one, but it could well be, and we're planning that it may go on for another week or two.
One of the nastiest that I've ever been involved in. On the scale of 1 to 10, I suppose you'd have to say 10. Everybody who worked on it was affected. Most of us had children, and I can't think of much more devastating than to lose a child, and to lose a child through murder. Double devastation.
As many leads poured in, there was nothing that led them anywhere significant.
Did you see that? Strange place to take a bite. Yeah.
The murder remained a cold case until 1999. Every year, cold cases are reassessed for DNA advances, possible suspects, and a DNA profile was obtained from the stored material using a new low copy number (LCN) testing technique, which was continually checked against the UK National DNA Database. And for the next 2 years, until a match was finally discovered. A man named Tony Jasinski had been arrested and was down in the cells, being charged for assaulting his second wife. And as they processed him downstairs, a DNA swab was taken from him. He had little to no criminal history, and what officers found next was shocking. Tony had been a lance corporal in the Army Catering Corps, based in Aldershot, and was living in married army quarters with his first wife at the time. Thruss was only about 1.5 miles away from where Marion had been murdered. He lived with his first wife, Lynn, who was heavily pregnant at the time. He'd married her in 1976. At the time of his arrest, Tony had been divorced from his first wife since 1984. He had been discharged from the Army Catering Corps and was working as a security guard in Leicester. He was living at Kegworth Avenue and married to his second wife. After Marion had been found murdered, this man, Tony, had been among 20,000 men questioned to their whereabouts at the time of the murder, but Tony seemed to have officers believing his story, and at the time no DNA swabs were taken. On being arrested for assaulting his second wife, police took a routine DNA sample and fed it into their databank, and on finding a match, Tony was arrested again in April 2001, and this time for the murder and RAPE of Marion Crofts. The man that probably thought he had got away with murder and thought maybe that if they hadn't caught him by now they never would, was charged with 2 convictions from the crime back in 1981. He denied all the charges and pleaded not guilty in court, meaning her parents would have to sit through a full-on trial, like they hadn't suffered enough. The trial was held at Winchester Crown Court, where experts pointed out that DNA material on Marion Crofts was a match to the sample taken of Tony Jasinski. The jury were told that the DNA match to Tony was 1 in a billion, and after a 4-week trial, the jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding Tony guilty on both charges. He was then subsequently sentenced to life in prison for the murder and RAPE of Marion. with both charges to run concurrently. In sentencing him, Judge Michael Broderick told Tony, "You have committed a cruel and callous murder," and had given Marion Croft's family 21 years of suffering. In 2014, he even tried to appeal his life sentence, arguing at the Court of Appeal in London that the DNA evidence produced at the 2002 trial was flawed, as it contained material from the victim suggesting that the murder had a chromosome disorder, meaning he had been wrongfully convicted. But the Court of Appeal Judge Lord Justice Phillips said that the original verdict was entirely safe and dismissed Tony's fanciful claims, stating that he had a fixation on the anomaly. In April 2022, the parole board revealed that he could be considered for release within weeks. Marion's heartbroken father said at the time that given the opportunity, he would kill that beast who murdered his daughter rather than see him freed. Marion's father, who was 84 at the time he gave the interview, said, "I hate Tony Jasinski. Given the right opportunity and he in a GUN, I would take him out. Or if there was a chance that he could be hung, I would pull the trapdoor. I'm a bit old and dilapidated, but while I'm still here, I don't want him free." Marion's devastated mother, Anne Crofts, had to be institutionalised following the murder and died soon after the trial. Trevor said Marion's mother never recovered from the ordeal. At the trial, Tony never showed any signs of remorse for the crimes back in 1981, as many of his ex-wives and partners sat in the gallery looking for justice due to the years of torment they'd had to put up with too. We know if Tony Jasinski is out now. I'm not sure, I couldn't find anything. I don't know whether he's out on good behaviour, whether he's served his sentence and is, out now living his life like nothing ever happened. It's just a shame that Marion was unable to live her life, to have children, to get married, to go travelling, to do all the things she should have been able to achieve. This was the story of Marion Crofts.